New Orleans, 1919. 18-year-old Louis Armstrong stood backstage and his hands were trembling. This was his first real stage performance, not the small shows on riverboats, but at Funky Butt Hall, New Orleans' most prestigious jazz club, in front of 400 people, a solo performance, alone. As Louis held his cornet, the club owner, Mr. Johnson, came up beside him and said coldly, "Kid, the audience isn't used to seeing someone like you. If you can't impress them in the first 2 minutes, leave the stage." Louis nodded, but the only thing going through his mind was, 2 minutes? I'm going to win them over with 2 notes. 5 minutes later, when Louis Armstrong walked onto that stage, what he did changed not just that night, but jazz history forever. 400 people stood up. The applause lasted 10 minutes, and Mr. Johnson was crying backstage. But what did Louis think before he played that first note? And what happened in those 2 minutes that shocked everyone? The answer tells the story of 18 years of struggle, hunger, rejection, and endless work. But to understand why that night mattered so much, we need to go back a few weeks to see what Louis had been enduring just to get to that stage. If this story has captured your attention, please subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to discover reveals how one of music's greatest legends was born in a single, unforgettable night. 4 weeks before that legendary performance, Louis Armstrong was sleeping in a storage room above a coal yard in the Storyville district of New Orleans. The room wasn't meant for living. It was barely 6 feet by 8 feet, with no windows, no heat, and a ceiling so low Louis couldn't stand up straight. But it was free, given to him by the coal yard owner in exchange for Louis helping load coal wagons at dawn. At 18 years old, Louis had been making music professionally for about a year, playing cornet at funerals, in small dance halls, on riverboats that traveled up and down the Mississippi. But none of that work paid enough to afford real housing. Most nights, Louis made maybe 50 cents, sometimes $1 if he was lucky. That wasn't enough for rent, food, and the constant expense of keeping his cornet in working condition. So Louis lived in that storage room, woke before sunrise to haul coal, then spent his days searching for any musical work he could find. The physical exhaustion was constant, but what hurt more was the rejection. Every week, Louis would go to the better jazz clubs in New Orleans, the places where real musicians played, where people came specifically for the music, where a performer could actually make a living. He would ask the club owners, the band leaders, anyone who would listen for a chance to play. And every week he got the same responses: "You're too young. You're not ready. Come back when you have more experience." Some were kinder than others, but the message was always the same. Louis wasn't good enough yet. What made it worse was that Louis knew he was good enough. When he practiced alone in that storage room late at night, when he played at funerals and saw people cry, when he performed on the riverboats and watched dancers stop to listen, Louis knew he had something special. But knowing you're talented and convincing others to give you a chance are two completely different things, especially when you're 18, poor and black in 1919 New Orleans. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. 3 weeks before the Funky Butt Hall performance, something happened that almost broke Louis' spirit entirely. He had saved up $2, 2 full dollars, which represented 4 days of coal hauling and 6 small musical performances. With that money, Louis was going to buy food for the week and pay to get his cornet repaired. One of the valves was sticking, and Louis knew he couldn't perform at his best with a broken instrument. But on his way to the repair shop, Louis passed a family on the street, a mother and 3 small children, clearly hungry, clearly desperate. The woman was crying quietly, trying to keep her children calm. Louis stopped. He looked at his $2. He thought about his own childhood, about the times when he and his mother had been that hungry, that desperate. And then Louis did what he would do his entire life. He gave away what he couldn't afford to give. He handed the woman both dollars and walked away before she could thank him. That night, Louis ate nothing. The next day, he ate nothing. His cornet remained broken. And Louis cried in that storage room not from hunger, but from frustration at a world where you had to choose between eating and helping someone else eat. But Louis had learned something important during those hungry days. Music could transcend physical suffering. When his stomach was empty and his body was weak, Louis would pick up his cornet and play. The music didn't fill his belly, but it filled something else, a space inside him that hunger couldn't touch. And as Louis played in that tiny room, he started developing something that would define his entire career, a way of playing that came not from technique or training, but from pure emotion, from the soul. Louis began to understand that the best music wasn't about playing the notes correctly, it was about making people feel something. Every time he played, he thought about his mother working herself to exhaustion, about his childhood in poverty, about the constant rejection, about giving away his last $2 to a hungry family. And all of that pain, all of that struggle, all of that humanity poured into his music. 2 weeks before the Funky Butt Hall performance, Louis finally caught a break, but it came in an unexpected way. He was playing at a funeral in one of New Orleans' poorest neighborhoods, earning 25 cents for the job. As the procession moved slowly through the streets, Louis played a traditional spiritual on his cornet, even though the valve was still sticking. In the crowd watching the procession was a man named Joe Oliver. Though everyone called him King Oliver, Oliver was already a legend in New Orleans jazz circles, one of the best cornet players in the city. He stopped walking when he heard Louis play. There was something different about this kid's sound, something raw and emotional that Oliver rarely heard. After the funeral, Oliver approached Louis and asked him a simple question. "How long you been playing?" Louis, intimidated to be talking to King Oliver himself, stammered out, "About 5 years, sir. Learned at the waif's home." Oliver nodded slowly. "You got something special, kid, but you're playing that horn like it's broken." Louis looked down, embarrassed. "It is broken, sir. Can't afford to fix it right now." What King Oliver did next changed Louis's trajectory completely. Oliver reached into his pocket and pulled out $5, more money than Louis had seen in months. "Get that horn fixed, and when it's fixed, come find me. I might have some work for you." Louis was stunned. $5 was a fortune. But more than the money, it was the recognition from someone he respected, someone who actually understood music. That night, Louis got his cornet repaired and practiced for 8 hours straight, his fingers bleeding from the intense work, but his spirit soaring. For the first time in months, Louis felt hope. Maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe his talent was real. Maybe someone other than himself could see what he was capable of. Do you think Louis would have made it without that moment of encouragement from King Oliver? Share your thoughts in the comments. The week before the Funky Butt Hall performance, Louis went to find King Oliver like he'd been told. Oliver was rehearsing with his band at a small club, and when Louis walked in, Oliver waved him over. "Let me hear you play something now that your horn's fixed." Louis, nervous but prepared, played a short improvisation. Nothing fancy, just a simple melody that he embellished with his own style. The other band members stopped playing to listen. When Louis finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Oliver smiled, a rare sight according to those who knew him. "Kid, you got more soul in one note than most players got in a whole song. I want to help you, but you need experience. You need to play in front of a real audience. See how you handle pressure." Oliver thought for a moment. "There's a show at Funky Butt Hall next week, Saturday night. A big crowd. I was supposed to play a solo set before the main band, but I got another gig. You want to take my spot?" Louis couldn't believe what he was hearing. Funky Butt Hall was legendary, the place where careers were made or broken, where the best musicians in New Orleans proved themselves. To play there as an 18-year-old unknown was almost unheard of. "Sir, yes, I want to." Oliver's expression turned serious. "But understand something, kid. That audience doesn't care about your story. They don't care that you're young or that you've been hungry or that you've struggled. They care about one thing. Can you play? If you can't deliver, they'll let you know, and if you fail at Funky Butt Hall, every other club in New Orleans will hear about it. This is your shot. Don't waste it." Louis nodded, feeling the weight of what he'd just been offered. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test. a chance to prove himself or be marked as someone who couldn't handle the pressure. The next 7 days were the most intense of Louis's life. He practiced constantly, worked out every detail of what he would play, visualized the performance over and over. If you're enjoying this journey into Louis Armstrong's early struggles, please hit that subscribe button. This story is about to get even more powerful. The day of the Funky Butt Hall performance arrived, and Louis woke up with a strange feeling, not nervousness, but clarity. All the practicing, all the preparation suddenly felt unnecessary. Louis realized that if he tried to play it safe, if he tried to please everyone, he would fail. The only way to succeed was to be completely himself, to play the way he played in that storage room when no one was listening, to pour all his emotion and experience into every note. But that realization was scary because it meant being vulnerable. It meant showing 400 strangers his pain, his struggles, his humanity. Most performers tried to hide their difficulties, to present a polished professional image. Louis was about to do the opposite. He was going to show them everything. That evening, Louis arrived at Funky Butt Hall 3 hours early. The club was empty except for staff preparing for the night. Louis walked onto the stage and just stood there, getting used to the space, imagining the crowd, preparing himself mentally. The club owner, Mr. Johnson, came in and looked surprised to see Louis. "You're the kid playing tonight? How old are you?" When Louis said 18, Johnson's face showed clear skepticism. "Oliver recommended you, so I'm giving you a shot. But let me be clear, this crowd pays good money for good music. You got 2 minutes to prove yourself. If they're not feeling it, you're done. No second chances." Louis met Johnson's eyes and spoke with quiet confidence. "I only need 2 minutes." Johnson raised an eyebrow, clearly doubting this kid's bravado, then walked away, shaking his head. As the evening progressed and the club filled with people, Louis stayed backstage, occasionally peeking out at the growing crowd. 400 people, the biggest audience of his life. They were dressed well, drinking, laughing, ready for entertainment. Many of them were musicians themselves or serious jazz fans who knew quality when they heard it. This wasn't a forgiving crowd. They had seen and heard the best. At 8:30, 15 minutes before Louis was scheduled to perform, Mr. Johnson came backstage with final instructions. "The band will introduce you. Walk out, play your set, walk off. Keep it simple. And remember, 2 minutes. If I don't see people responding, I'm cutting you off." Louis nodded. His hands weren't shaking anymore. His mind was calm. He had spent 18 years preparing for this moment, even though he hadn't known it. Every funeral he played, every riverboat performance, every night crying in that storage room, it had all been leading here. At 8:45, the house band finished their opening number, and the band leader stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest tonight. He's young, he's hungry, and he's got something to prove. Please welcome to the Funky Butt Hall stage, Louis Armstrong." The applause was polite but tentative. People were curious more than excited. Louis walked onto the stage carrying his cornet, and immediately he could feel the skepticism in the room. He was so young, wearing clothes that were clearly borrowed and too big for him, looking more like someone who should be in the audience than on the stage. Some people even laughed. Not cruelly, but with surprise at how young and inexperienced he looked. Louis reached the center of the stage, and then he did something that confused everyone. He didn't start playing. He just stood there, cornet in hand, eyes closed, for 30 full seconds of complete silence. The crowd's murmuring grew louder during those 30 seconds. What was this kid doing? Was he nervous? Had he frozen? Mr. Johnson started moving toward the stage, ready to end this embarrassment before it got worse. But just as Johnson was about to signal for Louis to leave, Louis opened his eyes, raised his cornet to his lips, and played one single note. That note rang out through Funky Butt Hall with a clarity and emotion that immediately silenced every conversation, stopped every movement, commanded every bit of attention in that room. It wasn't a technical flourish or a fancy run. It was just one perfect note held for 3 seconds but played with such soul and feeling that everyone in that room felt it in their chest. The second note followed, different in pitch but equal in emotional power. And then Louis began to play what he had been preparing. Not a standard jazz number, not a popular song, but an improvised piece that told the story of his life without words. Louis played about struggle. He played about hunger. He played about watching his mother work herself to exhaustion. He played about sleeping in a storage room. He played about giving his last $2 to a hungry family. He played about hope and perseverance and the belief that music could heal what nothing else could touch. And as he played, something extraordinary happened in Funky Butt Hall that night. People who had come to dance stood still, transfixed. People who had come to drink put down their glasses. People who had come to socialize stopped talking and just listened. Because Louis Armstrong wasn't just playing music, he was sharing his soul. Every note was honest, vulnerable, fearless. This wasn't a polished professional performance. This was raw humanity transformed into sound. And it was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard before. 2 minutes turned into 5 minutes, and Mr. Johnson, who had been ready to cut Louis off, found himself standing in the back of the club with tears streaming down his face. 5 minutes turned into 10, and the audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. 10 minutes turned into 15, and Louis was in a state of pure artistic flow, playing things he didn't even know he could play, accessing a level of creativity and emotion he'd never reached before. When Louis finally played his last note and lowered his cornet, there was total silence for 3 full seconds. And then the entire club exploded. 400 people leaped to their feet, applauding, shouting, crying. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. People were embracing each other, moved by what they'd just experienced. Musicians in the audience were shaking their heads in disbelief, knowing they'd just witnessed something that would become legendary. Mr. Johnson rushed onto the stage and grabbed Louis's hand, shaking it vigorously. "Kid, I don't know where that came from, but you just played the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my 30 years running this club. You got a job here anytime you want it." King Oliver, who had been standing in the back watching, pushed through the crowd to reach Louis. Oliver's face showed something Louis had never seen before, genuine awe. "Louis, I've been playing cornet for 20 years, and in 15 minutes, you just taught me something I never knew. That music isn't about the notes. It's about the truth. You played the truth tonight, and everybody felt it." Other musicians crowded around, wanting to shake Louis's hand, to congratulate him, to ask how he learned to play like that. Louis, overwhelmed and exhausted, could barely speak. All he could think about was how close he'd come to never having this moment. How if Oliver hadn't given him those $5, if Johnson hadn't given him a chance, if he'd given up during those hungry weeks, none of this would have happened. But the most important impact of that night wasn't the immediate acclaim. It was what happened afterward. Word spread through New Orleans' music community like wildfire. By the next morning, every club owner, every band leader, every serious musician had heard about the 18-year-old kid who had played at Funky Butt Hall and moved an entire room to tears. Louis went from being nobody to being the most talked-about musician in New Orleans overnight. Job offers started coming in. Musicians wanted to collaborate with him. People who had rejected him weeks earlier were suddenly eager to work with him. Within a month, Louis was making more money than he'd ever dreamed of. He moved out of that storage room and into actual housing. He could afford to eat regular meals. His cornet was always in perfect condition. But more important than any of that external success was what Louis discovered about himself that night at Funky Butt Hall. In Honor-Zoo, struggles weren't weaknesses to hide, they were strengths to share. His pain wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was what made his music real. Years later, when Louis Armstrong was famous around the world, a young musician asked him about that night at Funky Butt Hall. "Mr. Armstrong, what were you thinking during those 30 seconds before you started playing?" Louis smiled, that famous warm smile that would become known globally, and said, "I was thinking about every person who told me I wasn't good enough every time I went to bed hungry. Every moment I wanted to quit but kept going anyway. And I decided that I was going to play for them, for all the people who struggle and hurt and keep trying. I decided I was going to tell their story, not just mine." The young musician pressed further. "But weren't you terrified? 400 people, your first big performance? So much pressure?" Louis nodded. "Terrified. But I realized something that night. The only real failure is playing it safe. If I tried to be what I thought they wanted, I would have failed no matter how technically perfect I played. But if I was honest, if I was myself, even if they rejected me, at least I would know I gave them the truth." That philosophy would define Louis Armstrong's entire career. From that night forward, Louis never pretended to be anything he wasn't. He played with honesty, with soul, with vulnerability. And that authenticity is what made him not just a great musician, but a transformative artist who changed jazz forever. But it all started on one night in 1919, when an 18-year-old kid with a broken past and a borrowed coat walked onto a stage, closed his eyes, and decided to play 2 notes that would change his life. Those 2 notes became 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes became a career. That career became a legacy that still inspires musicians today. And it all happened because Louis Armstrong understood something at 18 that some people never learn. Your struggles don't disqualify you from greatness. They qualify you. Your pain doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And your willingness to share that humanity, to be vulnerable, to tell the truth through your art, that's what transforms talent into genius. On that August night in 1919, 400 people in Funky Butt Hall didn't just hear great music, they witnessed the birth of a legend. Not because Louis Armstrong played perfect notes, not because he had the best technique or the most training, but because for 15 minutes, he opened his heart completely and let everyone see inside. He played his truth, and in doing so, he gave permission for others to embrace their own truths, their own struggles, their own stories. That's the real legacy of that night. Not the standing ovation, not the job offers, not even the start of Louis's career. The real legacy is the reminder that our deepest wounds can become our greatest gifts, that our hardest struggles can become our most powerful stories, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply tell the truth about who we are and what we've survived. Louis Armstrong learned that at 18, and for the next 52 years until his death in 1971, he never forgot it. Every performance, every recording, every note he played carried the echo of that first night when a hungry, desperate, determined kid decided that 2 minutes was enough time to change everything. And he was right.